My name's Dr. Paul Brewerton, the Strengths Guy, Doctor of Psychology and Chair and Founder of StrengthScope. I podcast each week just as you're getting your head back into work mode to give you a positive, strengths-based boost into your week ahead. My podcasts are packed full of tips and tools to help you get the best out of your working week. I hope you enjoy this week's podcast. Hi, my name is Dr. Paul Brewerton, the Strengths Guy, Doctor of Organisational Psychology and Founder and Chair of StrengthScope. I'm very excited today to have on the show the most wonderful Mr. Paul Mehra. Hello, Paul.
Good morning.
So Paul is a learning and development consultant at StrengthScope. He also has his own coaching consultancy. He's been delivering training, coaching and team development for the past few decades. How long exactly, Paul?
It's frightening. I always say I officially started work in 1986, so we're 3 years short of 40.
That's fantastic, actually, isn't it? Like, that's very soon. It's going to be. Yes. I've been doing this for 40 years.
Exactly.
What don't you know? I mean, honestly, we're in the presence of greatness. This is going to be fantastic. So the thing I really want to focus on today in our conversation is your passion, your true passion for education and learning, and particularly the role of strengths within that context. So yeah, that's what we're going to focus on today. A topic which will be of major interest, I think, to the audience, because it comes up regularly in conversations I know that you and I have together, but also that we have with clients, with practitioners of StrengthScope and strengths. So strengths in education. Why do we need the strengths philosophy in education? How can we introduce more strengths thinking and practice into schools, colleges, universities, but quite frankly, all places of education right across the piece? And what needs to change to enable that to happen? So before we get into what is actually a very meaty topic, I'd love for you to share with the audience, Paul, more about you from birth to now in under 30 seconds. No, in as long as you need.
Right.
And as you know, because I know you listen to the podcast, sometimes that can be quite long in duration. Some people will take maybe 15 or 20 minutes of a soliloquy to, kind of finish that off. Up to you, really, how much you want to share. But, particularly that passion that you have around strengths in education, where it's come from, and I suppose where you're applying that passion today would be great to hear about. But I'd love to hear a bit more about your whole story, if you could.
Okay. I'll try and keep it brief. So I think the place for me to start is with my own education, actually. So when I was in my very early teens, I recognized myself as being fairly unusual within my peer group, in that I was very clear what I wanted to do for a living. So at the age of 13, it was very clear to me that I wanted to be a solicitor. Wow. And I held that in my mind all the way through my secondary school. Why? I wanted to go into career in law.
I'm fascinated by why you would have that in your, how did it ping into your head?
That's a great question, actually. Do you know what? I think it's because at the time there used to be a lot of TV shows and films that were set in court. Yeah. And the whole drama of appearing in court and defending someone and making these grand speeches really appealed to me. And as you know, I'm also a bit of an amateur thespian. Yeah. So I think that as an introvert, that was the way I kind of thought I can project myself into the outside world. Love it. And play a role. So I think it was all the drama of it. Yeah. So I was very clear right the way through to doing my A levels and thinking about going to university that I was going to go on and do law. Yeah. And as it happened, when it came to choosing my degree and my university, I actually had something which again was relatively unusual, I think, even back in the late 70s. Yeah. A really helpful careers person at school.
Yeah, that is unusual.
Yeah. And they gave me some really sage advice, which was, it didn't look like my A-level results were going to be as good to get me to a good university to read law. Yeah. So they said, given that you haven't done any law so far, so you don't actually know what it's going to be like, and you may not get to the university that ideally you'd like to read law, why don't you do a subject that you really enjoy, go to a good university and study that, and then you can always convert to law afterwards.
Oh, how cool. So basically follow your passion, like do the stuff you love.
exactly. Which
Wow.
really, and actually was after the initial shock of that, I thought, right, well, it's easy. I'm going to go and study history, which again, as you know, is a real passion of
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah.
I absolutely love history. I read so many books on history and watch so many documentaries. So that's what I did. I went to University of London, studied history, and then I went to law school. So I got my place at law school.
Yeah.
If you go to law school with a non-law degree, you do what's called a conversion course, and then you do the solicitor's finals.
Okay.
So there I was at the College of Law, Chancery Lane, doing my conversion course, and I absolutely hated it. Absolutely.
I didn't know what you were going to say, but I was thinking, at what point does this pivot in a different direction?
Yeah.
And it was at this point.
It was at this point. It was a case of, I mean, literally going into college for about 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, and literally listening to people telling you about case law.
Wow.
So it was just a case of learning all of these different cases over, you know, the last couple of 100 years and their relevance in modern law. And the idea was you learn all those and then you'd be tested at the end of it. I did.
Sorry, it's not. I mean, it's just the way you're describing it as not being particular. Because I imagine there's people in the room, you know, with you who are going, "This is amazing. I'm loving this," you know. But it wasn't for you.
It wasn't for me, and I'm probably also talking to people who have law degrees who thought, well, I thoroughly enjoyed my law degree.
Yeah.
I still like the concept of law, and there were some fascinating subjects that we covered because, of course, law is subjugated into various areas. You've got criminal and contract and so on. I found it very fascinating. It was just that sheer process of rote learning at the age of whatever I was, 23, 24. And I'd basically had a belly full of education by that stage.
Yeah, true.
So then I ended up just like everybody else, or most of the graduates that I knew at the time, not really knowing what I wanted to do in my degree.
Yeah, yeah.
So to cut a long story short, I spent a couple of years doing bits and pieces, living in France for a while. And then I started to apply for jobs, management trainee jobs, basically, in retail and financial services.
Okay.
And all the retail ones rejected me out of hand for some reason. And I kept getting requests from the financial services organizations, which led me to the first big chunk in my career, which was working for Nationwide Building Society.
Yeah.
I started off in retail. I did 3 years in retail, and then I had the opportunity to move into training, which I absolutely enjoyed. I was a branch manager. I loved helping staff learn and develop new roles and being able to rotate people around so that it didn't become too boring.
Yeah.
And it was really powerful. The impact on those people was palpable. So
hold on. So was that you as a branch manager or you as a training manager at that point?
As a branch manager. So within 3 years, I was a branch manager.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I understand.
So I got a role in training and development, and I never looked back. And Nationwide was, and I think still is, a really good organization when it comes to learning and development. I met some fabulous people along the way, many of whom have gone on to really, really significant roles in the field globally. And that was my grounding. So I started out in training. I then moved into management development. That brought me into the field of psychology and psychometrics, team development, people development. And I never looked back, really. I moved on from Nationwide after about 11 years. I had a couple of very strange years with a big IT services company, which I won't go into now, but it at the time was hell on earth.
Oh, really?
But when I look back, it was great learning because the way I managed myself through that and came through it was really powerful. And then I ended up working for Zurich Insurance Group. So I spent 15 years with Zurich, initially in the UK. Then I had a European role and finally a global role. That was good because, again, it was just expanding my opportunities within the learning and development field. And of course, it also allowed me to travel, which, as you know well, I love doing too. I don't mind traveling for work. That was great. So I saw a bit of the world.
Yeah.
So that kind of one more story that is relevant actually to bring us to where we are today is that when I was at Zurich, I remember one of my projects at the time was writing a competency framework for leaders. And that never sat comfortably with me. I'd done it several times, and the whole process felt odd. Why does someone need to tick all these different boxes before they can then be promoted or moved into a different role? Just because there's evidence that they've done this and they've done it to a certain standard. And it was at that time that I came across the Marcus Buckingham work, the now break all the rules and play to your strengths, know your strengths. And it was just like a real aha moment for me, because of course it said people are individuals, and managers, the best managers, know their own strengths and they play to their people's strengths. They don't try and be everything to everyone and cover all the bases. As we know, that's not the way it works. So that was my first foray into the world of strengths, and it just grew from there. A couple of other things that I think are relevant as I'm talking about how I came to be where I am today. So obviously, well, not obviously, but I am a parent, and I am also a grandparent. So I have 2 grown-up children, and I have 2 granddaughters, 16 and 10. Who would have thought?
I know, can't believe it, because I would have had you pegged as, I don't know, like you're younger than that. How can it be possible?
We won't go into that, but so I have experience of bringing up kids and grandchildren. I've also been a school governor for a few years at my children's local primary school. But in the last few years, I've also taken on the role as an enterprise advisor. So
what is that?
So the enterprise advisor scheme is a national scheme which pairs people in business with local schools through the education authorities, and those individuals support the schools in career development. So it's kind of come full circle to what I talked about with my own career experience at school. These days, there is so little resource available in schools to support children thinking about their careers and what they might do for a living and so on. So they get people in business to support the schools in that agenda. Because of my background and my role, I tend to do some very practical things with the schools, which I'll come on to a bit later. Yeah, that's where I am. And I left Zurich, 8 or 9 years ago. And essentially I've been both running my own business and of course joyfully working with StrengthScope for almost 4 years.
And thank you for that choice, which I know is it is a choice for everyone who works at StrengthScope. Every day you make that choice. Do I continue to come to work at StrengthScope? And thank you for continuing with that journey, because it's fantastic to have you on the team. So with all of that, and it's fascinating hearing you pick those highlights, those stories that kind of illustrate pivot points for you. And I'm sure, that will kind of weave into your views on strengths and education and so on. So I'm sure we'll pick all those bits back up as we go. But let's get into that now. Let's think about strengths and education. So how do you feel that the concept of strengths can help in education settings at different stages, different ages, different places? What's your thoughts on that?
So I think the field is very, very broad in terms of application, and I think it's important for me to say at this point as well that when we're talking about strengths here, I'm also thinking about individuals' passions, where their energy is, what gives them pleasure and motivation. So we that reinforcing that energy piece is so important for me. So who is it for? Who can it help in education? I think it can help anyone. I put down, first of all, I put all ages of children and young adults. So primary, I say primary, even before primary school, I think there's application when children are very young. But primary school, secondary school, tertiary education, and as you said, actually, recently, whole life. I mean, we learn throughout our lives, so there's no reason why we should suddenly decouple our passions when we finish our formal education. It should be what we carry into our work. So I think it's really helpful for people going through the education system, for want of a better word. In fact, that's probably a good word at the moment, because it does feel like a system.
Yeah, very much.
Rather than, I think it should be an experience.
Yes.
But I think it's relevant for parents too, because I think a lot of parents are desperate to understand how to really help and support their children to be the best they can be, and ultimately to see them be happy. Which, as we know, again, there is a strong link between playing to our strengths and having a feeling of happiness. It's also, of course, highly relevant for anyone who's involved in teaching or associated with teaching within education. And I'm conscious that teachers, particularly in this country, are under absolutely enormous pressure. It's that pressure has built over the years, has never gone away. And as we know, strengths is a key component in helping people support their mental health and well-being. So I think not only helping teachers understand how to apply strengths in the way they teach and the way they work with children, but also for themselves is important. And I think anyone who works with young children, so outside of formal education, people who are working with, youth clubs, sports, organizations, whatever. So I think it has such a wide application. And there's one more, if I may, which is another subject which is becoming increasingly mainstream, thankfully, these days, is the whole field of neurodiversity. So it's not just about tapping into what makes children tick and how to get the best from them, but it's also recognizing that children learn in different ways and at different speeds. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly normal. It's perfectly natural. But we've had a tendency over the years to kind of stream children and see and look for the brightest and the best, whatever that means. And to some extent, or to a large extent, therefore ignore the rest, and they fall by the wayside, which is terribly disheartening in so many ways.
There's so much to pick up on there, and I'm immediately taken to that seminal TED talk by Sir Ken Robinson. And education is killing creativity, or I maybe got that slightly wrong, but it includes those words, I think, the title, or education. I think it's something like that. But that really, for me, it's exactly what you're talking about, isn't it? It's helping people spot their passions, helping kids to spot their passions, recognizing that, well, as far as he was concerned, there should be no hierarchy from an educational subject perspective, that actually all subjects should be treated equally, whether that be art or dance or drama, maths, science, English, all of those things should be given the same leveling, almost, rather than it being seen as, one is better than the other, one's more important than the other. And I heard him interviewed not so long ago, actually, sadly passed now, but he was being interviewed on the radio, and they really kind of pressed him on that point. They were saying, you said this quite some time ago, have you changed your view? No, he said, of course I haven't changed my view. If anything, I've doubled down on it. That is absolutely the case. Why do we have this hierarchy of subjects? Is it all about, producing academic professors? Why should it be that? We need to be in the process or in the business of helping create a diverse population, people who have all sorts of different skills, passions, strengths, and, that requires for those to be given sort of an equal opportunity from an early education, rather than one being seen as better than the other in some way. So it was fascinating to hear him talk again, following on from what and quite frankly, if anyone hasn't seen it, who's listening to or watching the show today or this episode, please do go check it out. Go and find it on the TED website or wherever you may. I mean, it's everywhere. I think it's the most downloaded TED talk ever, and rightly so.
It's called "Do Schools Kill Creativity?"
Thank you.
As that.
Did you go and check that out, like while we were talking, or do you know that?
I already knew it.
Yeah, that's right.
It's so true, and it's so relevant even today. It's very, very current. The government have said everyone needs to study maths until the age of 18, and there's been this huge outcry from all sorts of people. It's all over social media saying, what about the arts? What about other creative subjects? Why should maths suddenly be the be all and end all? And to your point, this concept of multiple intelligences, and I did look this up beforehand because I couldn't remember who had originally come up with this idea, but it's
I know that, so that's good. This is working well,
so,
like this conversation. It's Howard Gardner.
So it's largely attributed to, now you'll tell me I've got it wrong, but I believe it's Howard Gardner.
Howard Gardner, correct,
1983, multiple intelligences. And that's something that I came across many years ago, and I thought, well, that's got to be true because I love history. If I could, one of the things I often think about is, if I had my time again, would I have gone down the route of maybe archaeology or something associated with history? And look at the guys that are on TV making documentaries about history and having a whale of a time in muddy fields.
That's so funny though, because that's in your view, and I look at that and I think, look at them in muddy fields, like digging around in the muck. I don't know if I'd like to do that, but for you, like that just looks amazing. I think it's fantastic. But that's it, isn't it? That's exactly it. It's, we all have this unique perspective. We all have this different set of passions that, until we have the experience, we're not necessarily going to know that passion is there until we're given the opportunity. And importantly, someone maybe spots that we seem really passionate about a particular topic, or we light up, we change in some way. And that, we see that with strengths work all the time, right? Where someone's talking about a particular example where they were using a strength or combination of strengths, they do genuinely light up there. You can see them getting much more energized in the way that they're talking, and they're unlikely to know that themselves. So it does need somebody, to be spotting that on their behalf and pointing out that maybe there's a difference here, in the way that you're engaging with this subject, or with this modality of learning. You were talking about that and how people like to learn in different ways, and we've all met kids who they move all the time, or they seem to be fidgety or whatever, whatever label we use to describe them. And actually that's how they're taking in information, because they need to move in order to process. Well, that's and they might be more attracted to something like drama or dance or whatever, because actually that's a way of engaging with the world for them that comes much more easily. It's a strength area for them.
And that's one of Ken Robinson's classic examples, isn't it, of the parent that took their child to the psychologist because the parent believed that she had all sorts of problems, and she wanted her to have this formal education and be successful, whatever that meant. And this little girl was just moving all the time, and the psychologist took the parent out of the room, said to the little girl, stay there, I'm just going to talk to your mum. Took her outside the room and said, just send her to dance school. That's where she will be successful. And she went on to become one of the most famous dancers or choreographers.
Amazing story. Fantastic.
In 50 years.
Making my hair stand on end. I mean, there is a bit.
This is what this is really important to me as well, because actually Marcus Buckingham has said this recently. He said, if you think about parents and children, parents are like holding the bow, as in a bow and arrow, and the child is the arrow. So whilst you're holding the bow ready to launch the arrow, you as the parent have that stability. But once you've let go of that arrow, that child should be free to go. And then it's about supporting them. It's about being curious, helping them be curious about what they might try, what they might do. Don't be afraid of failure. If you try something and you don't like it, that's great. You've learned something. Try something else. I just thought that was so powerful, rather than this concept of, we want our children to be something that we think is going to be good for them, or is important. We're often driven by this need to send our children to university, to get a degree, to get a good job, to be able to afford a house and buy a car and have a family. And why? What? Because that maybe brought us happiness and satisfaction, and actually, as we know, for many of us, it doesn't necessarily do those things. But why should we transfer that onto our children? And I one of the things that I noticed I've done completely differently between my children and my grandchildren since I discovered strengths and negativity bias is
Mhm.
when my kids used to come home with their school reports,
Mm.
and this is something we cover on accreditations.
Yeah.
When my kids came home with their school reports, I would focus in on what they hadn't done so well.
Yeah.
That would be the focus.
It's really
With my
hard not to.
grandchildren, of
Yeah.
course, with my grandchildren, it's entirely the opposite. I
Yeah.
celebrate all the things that they've been praised for, and even if they flagged the things that they hadn't done so well, so I didn't do so well in maths or whatever,
Mm.
say that's okay, let's focus on what you have done really well first
Mm.
of all, and then let's worry about whether that math score
Yeah.
is really important or not.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just, I mean, the conversation is just completely different,
Isn't it? Because suddenly
for
it feels
them and for
possible.
me.
Yeah, I mean, it feels possible. You know, if you're being acknowledged for the good stuff that you're doing, then suddenly the more tricky stuff, the stuff where you're, you know, not perhaps doing so well, it suddenly feels more possible to engage with it, you know, because you're being acknowledged, recognized, and you clearly can in certain areas. So now maybe you can take some of the learning from that and put it into the areas which you're, you know, perhaps not so engaged with or whatever it may be. And in some cases, I mean, you know, I've got this, so I have a 14, almost 15-year-old, and he's going through his GCSEs, isn't his you know, second year of that this year, year 10. Is it year 10? Yeah, it must be. Or is it year 9? Anyway, whatever the year is. And he, you know, he's going through this process and kind of, you know, finding that some subjects are less interesting than others. And that's okay. You know, that will happen. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on, I think it's really interesting talking about all of that, because we were talking about how important it is. So I brought this in, but you know, you were mentioning this as well. You know, to have somebody there to spot where strengths may be, you know, coming into play, or where a passion may be identifiable, and point that out to somebody. And I wonder if so. My next question is, what is education missing at the moment, and you know, where strengths could help. You know, what's your vision for how things could change, the change that you would want to see in the world? And I wonder if there's an element of that around, you know, educators being more prepared to, you know, to spot individual differences and point them out. But actually, you know, I'll leave it open to you. What do you think? You know, what is your vision?
Well, I'll start with my vision, and I'm going to quote another guy who's worth seeking out on TED.
Yeah.
A guy called Ted Dintersmith.
Okay.
And his talk is called, if you just bear with me 1 second.
By the way, we'll put these in the show notes.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, people can find both the Ken Robinson one and this one too.
Yes, we will do. So, but Ted Dintersmith and his kind of call to arms to his audience were, he said, teachers, parents, communities, let's educate to our strengths and prepare our kids for life. And that's essentially, for me, what it should be about. It's preparing everybody to be the best they can be in this strange world that exists outside of the education system, called life. So for me, what is education missing? It's missing a lot of practical stuff. How many children these days are saying, you know, I'm worried about, I don't understand money. How does money work? You know, what is it all about? What is a mortgage? How do I save? All those sorts of things. But practical stuff, helpful stuff, and things that help children understand the way they can contribute in a practical sense, and do things that are meaningful, rather than learning stuff that is, in their eyes, and in fact probably to us as well, completely irrelevant. Again, Ted Dintersmith said that, you know, we're just reinforcing old methods. We test, we measure, and we improve for an outdated system, rather than innovate for a new one. We're still, you know, we're not an agricultural or a manufacturing economy anymore. We need people who can innovate, who are able to come in and meet the challenges of today's world, one of which is a thing called climate change. You know, we need people who are going to come out of school and are passionate about the environment and how to transform it back to something that it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Create a green economy, a global green economy.
Mm-hmm.
The digital age is we're well and truly within that.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence is suddenly, I can't believe, I would say, last week it wasn't around and now it's everywhere. I know that's not true, but artificial intelligence, virtual reality is absolutely transforming the world.
Yeah.
Not even every day, it's every second.
Yeah.
We need children who can link with that in some way, but use it to play to their strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also going to quote Amin Zaidi, who also has a really good TED talk. He said, we shouldn't just have institutions of performance, and by that he meant not just schools but organizations, where effectively we shut down people's happiness, their engagement, their passion, their enthusiasm, because it's all about the result and the performance. And we stifle all of that humanness that we all have.
Yeah, totally. Aman, by the way, came on the show not so long ago, so you can check it out. And we'll put that in the show notes as well as his TED talk, because you're absolutely right. Well worth a watch.
And then, so my own kind of final comment on this is, and I wrote this down in a moment of real passion. I just thought that for many, education is essentially a drainer of energy. So it does exactly the opposite. It's a place where children spend their time avoiding, escaping, ignoring, and switching off. And how sad is that?
Man, that is. It's really sad. It's really sad. I mean, when you know that's where your kids are. Not maybe this week in the UK anyway, because it's half term. But if that is the case, if that's what's going on, then that is what a great miss. For many, and I think thinking through what the antidote might be, and very, as you say, very practically, what are the skills that educators need? What are the skills that parents need?
Yes.
In order to really help children to find those passions and to legitimize those passions and help, as you've said, help them to see practically how that can add value in work, in society, more broadly in the home, in the family context as well. Because I think there's, again, when we know this about strengths, if you have them, you're unlikely or less likely to acknowledge them because that's just easy for you, and you'll be much more attuned to your weaknesses because that's how you've been, educated and raised. But actually, those are the areas, those strength areas, that's where you can, contribute the greatest value, as long as you can work out how to translate that ease of energy that you might get, that passion that you might feel, into something that's going to make, a practical difference to somebody else or to you.
Absolutely.
In the way that you're approaching life or work. And I think that's where people really need support. How can you help people to figure that out? Because it isn't obvious if you've not had all that experience in the world.
No, not at all. And again, this point about what can parents do? I think one relatively simple thing to do is stop telling children what they should do and start asking them what they want to do or what they enjoy or what they like and what they don't like, and be curious. And parents do that as well as teachers. So we have this phrase in loco parentis for teachers. In other words, they take the role of the parent when the kids are at school. But I think we've taken that too far. Too many parents, for all sorts of very valid reasons these days, but kind of just expect that somehow their children will be magically transformed by going to school and all will be well. But actually, it's the conversations that happen at home, and it's the activities that happen at home, and the experiences that parents can create that are as meaningful, if not more, than what they do at school.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's by showing curiosity. It's by showing interest. It's by flipping the way that you have the conversation with your child about their report card, so that you are focusing in on those areas where they're already excelling and asking them how they can do more with that. What have they learned about that? Why do they love that subject? What do they love about it? And it just changes the way that we're thinking, or that children are thinking about their education, that actually they're being seen rather than they're just a part in the system, which is, as you said, it kind of very much feels like right now.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to know whether you've seen any examples of good practice, so where is this working? Where can this work? Yeah, just keen to hear your views on that. Have you got anything you could share?
I have, and this is kind of where I feel that this conversation could be so powerful, because we'll have a kind of a call to arms in a bit, I know. So I am aware that there are many activities going on around the world in this space, not least in the UK. I'm going to start with my own work. So just as an enterprise advisor, I'm asked often, because of my own background, to do presentations on things like networking and interviews, presenting yourself. And one of the exercises that I do with groups of children is I get them all to, if I've got a group of children, I ask them all to introduce themselves to me and tell me one thing that they really love doing, they're really passionate about, or they're good at. And I reinforce that it doesn't have to be anything to do with school. And a number of amazing things happen. First of all, everybody says something, which often the teachers will say, I doubt that so-and-so will speak to you because they're so quiet. Everybody tells me something. They all say their name, and then they'll tell me something. And often it's absolutely incredible what they do. I've met children that are, they've got their own kind of like music studio set up in their bedroom, and they're broadcasting out through radio and making music and stuff. But they all tell me something. I then ask everybody to put their hands up if they've heard something about one of their fellow pupils that they didn't know, and everybody puts their hand up. And the other thing that's often happened is the teacher will say to me, I didn't know that about them. I never knew that. And it just goes to show me that, again, there is this untapped experience within the children that is so rich and so valuable, that with a few questions, a few well-placed questions, we can unlock this and help them to channel it in ways that can be helpful for them in future life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I do that. I have also recently been working with the local education authority. I'm not even sure if they're called that anymore, but
I don't know.
East Sussex Council's education people. I've been working with them using a strengths approach to help children who have struggled at school academically, but who are now going on to apply for apprenticeships or further education colleges, and using the language of strengths to help them articulate who they are, what they're good at, what they like, what they enjoy. And again, it's been incredibly powerful to see just what gets uncovered when you give them that strengths lens. And when you say it's not just talking about what you have or haven't done academically, forget all the subjects, what in life do you love doing? That's powerful. As you know, StrengthScope, we do quite a lot of work with universities, where university staff work with undergrads to help them both use strengths in a way that helps them understand their best ways to study. And again, actually, that's something I know is happening increasingly with neurodivergent graduates, is applying a strengths lens to help them to get the best identify the best ways of learning, which is very powerful. And a number of our client organizations in the world of work use strengths on their graduate programs, again, for that reason, to help people assimilate their learning better, faster, more effectively. I have a fairly broad and broadening StrengthScope practitioner network of people who are all over the country doing this kind of work in small pockets, running workshops, working with teaching staff, working with universities. Some are quite big projects, some are quite small. And I know that there's work going on in this space all over the world. You just need to search the internet, and if you look at strengths in education, there are pages of.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's positive that's happening. That you can find all of that out. And it would be great, wouldn't it, if they're I suppose it's just how it works. These little fires are being lit all over the place. And I was thinking, actually, it'd be great if we could kind of get a collective together of people who
Yeah.
could share best practice, etc. Maybe that'll just happen with enough people doing the work individually. That kind of coalescing will just start naturally to take place. But love the idea of, you know, people sharing what has worked for them, and recommending it elsewhere. I've got one. I mean, you and I have talked about this before, but you know, for the benefit of the audience, my boys' school. My oldest has now moved on to sixth form college, but Steyning Grammar School. This is in Sussex, West Sussex. And they use these things they call learning characteristics to grade the kids on a scale of 1 to 5. And they're based around positive psychology principles. So they did this research going probably back about a decade, maybe a little bit longer, as to, you know, the learning characteristics that seem to make the greatest difference to educational outcomes. So, you know, if kids are showing this or that, you know, particular characteristic, that's more likely to put them in a good place to get good grades or you know, enjoy school. And they're things like grit, so you know, persistence in work, zest, so sort of showing enthusiasm for things, curiosity. You know, that's great, isn't it? I'm always excited when Bruno, my youngest, you know, gets a zest. I'm like, wow, because he's so teenagey, you know, like he doesn't show zest. You know, I never see that. And yeah, he clearly does every now and again at school. Someone notices. Curiosity is another one, so showing interest in a topic and going further than the syllabus requires. Kindness has crept in fairly recently.
Oh, nice.
So that, you know, sort of showing compassion towards somebody, or being kind towards a teacher, putting things away at the end of class, whatever, and not being asked to do so. There's self-control with learning and self-control with others as well. So, you know, they often get mentioned. But so this happens in two ways. They get graded on these things in their reports, so their kind of end of term report. And you know, we get that as parents. We can chat through with them where they're scoring higher or lower, and you know, focusing on the higher, of course, as we know, is the best way. But also they get these kind of positive behavior points, which, I mean, I'm getting that feed on a daily basis. Sometimes I'll refresh multiple times a day to see what's happening at school for you know, for Bruno, where, you know, he's had one particular lesson where it's been outstanding. He's ended up with 5 of these kind of characteristics all popping out that the teacher's noticed. He doesn't know that's happened because the teacher won't say that. They grade the kids at the end of the lesson. But I can talk to him at the end of the day, you know, and say, you had a killer day today. You know, it was like 9 positive behavior points. What was going on? You're on fire. You know, and he's like thinking about it, going, oh, was I? What was going on? You know, and actually for him, it may be because he had breakfast rather than going the entire day at school, getting up too late, not having had any breakfast, getting to school and feeling a little bit woozy and tired, you know, because he didn't go to bed till too late as well because he was gaming. You know, and actually he can start making his decisions, you know, himself, because on days where he's kind of slept well, fed well, and it was really engaged because of the subject, he's going to be in a much better place to, you know, get the best from education. So I think it's really helpful having that, you know, and having that data feed as well as a parent is super helpful. So using the tech to actually, you know, help the parent to have more data, more information. So really interesting what they're doing there. I mean, I've got to say, you know, he'll be quite skeptical actually about those learning characteristics, and but I'm looking at it and going, but I can do something with that, you know.
Exactly.
I can help you help yourself, because that's my job. Anyway, okay, good. So any more, or are we kind of there with the examples? There's a lot there actually. I'm you know, heartened to hear that.
There is, and it kind of it I know you're going to ask me, you know, what's my kind of ask?
Actually, what is that? Let's go to that. What is your call to action? So
it links to something you said a little bit earlier, which is, you know, can we connect and share and build? So there are all these activities going on. How can we create this into a more powerful national or global kind of initiative issue? Because I think there's enough of us who get this and believe in it. So what does it take to really make that shift? You know, how can we build the case through stories, through testimonials, Statistics, not my favorite, but they're important.
But it is my favorite.
There you go.
Strengths, right?
But I'm just really keen, anybody who's interested, connect with us and tell us what you want to know and what you're doing and how we can help and how you can help us. That's really...
Do you know, that's a great call to action, right? Very practical. Yeah, we're absolutely in receive mode for that, and we'll help that. As you were talking earlier about, maths now being discussed in the UK as being something that maybe is going to be taken into education for everybody up to the age of 18, and some of the challenges with that, and maybe the slightly flawed thinking around it. And there've been many examples in the past decade, I would say, where education has almost fallen foul of slightly undercooked or underthought through policies around, like ways that we're trying to help, but actually is taking education back a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, I mean, in the same way, if we can get enough people together, then it should be possible to lobby government, to present to government, some of these ideas in a way that could, really help everybody, every child in the education system. If we can put something concrete forward to say, this is going to make a significant difference, in the same way that, Stelling Grammar School have done, they've said, look, we've done our own research, we're doing this off our own bat. But actually, we believe these learning characteristics and displaying more of them leads to better outcomes. And then, their kids get really good grades. Yeah. So, if there's more and more examples of that, then it should switch the government of the day, onto the possibility that maybe some policy changes would help here, and that then cascades out into all schools. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, totally agree. So that's my call to arms. If you're interested in getting involved or sharing your stories, or just knowing more, connect with us.
Yeah, do it. Connect. Absolutely. And we'll put your details, your contact details in the show notes, so people can just email you direct. I think it's probably the easiest way of doing it.
Or through LinkedIn, of course.
Yeah, LinkedIn. So Paul Mehra, and your name is up on the screen. So if anyone's unsure how to spell it, there it is. Mehra. Let's finish off. I just got one final question, really. So what are your top takeaways, top tips, practically speaking, for parents we've talked about, carers, educators, in terms of, practical ways that you can bring strengths thinking and practice into, into your day-to-day?
Okay, well, I'm going to do some unashamed plagiarizing now. And come back to Mr. Marcus Buckingham, if I may. He has something called a manifesto for school change. There are 6 points. I just love them. So number 1, stop seeing parenting as a competitive sport. You don't live through your children.
Yeah. So
recognize them as individual human beings and support them in what they want to do, what they want to be.
Yeah.
Number 2, stop projecting your own fears onto your children. Help them understand their fears and don't try to remove it from them. What we fear helps us understand what we love, which I just think is brilliant. Stop reading news reports on college rankings or school rankings, says they're irrelevant and unhelpful. But start reading the research that tells you that for most kids, it really doesn't matter which school or college they go to. It's much more about how they're going to be supported and how their natural strengths and talents are going to be nurtured and drawn out. Pressure. This is a good one. This is back to our call to arms. Let's pressure schools and colleges to get rid of standardized tests. And a lot of schools and colleges do that because it helps with their branding. It helps them get more pupils, which helps them get more funding. But actually, it's still at the end of the day, children having to say, I got an A, B, or a C, or a 1, 2, or a 3, and that's a good thing or a bad thing. And this one I like too. Start and call to parents. Start the use of clubs and activities or charity work, or to get children more involved in things that are not directly associated with school. So if you think they've got particular intelligences that are not being measured at school, give them the outlet to do that. You know, let them join a drama club or a sports club, or get involved in volunteering, whatever it may be. And if they don't like it, that's fine, but at least they've given it a go.
Yeah.
So I just thought those were some
they're
really
brilliant. I mean, they're really chunky, and you know, to go away and kind of consider how you could do, you know, one of those would be amazing. So thank you, Paul.
I've got one ad as well, which is back to something we said near the beginning, which is for parents and teachers, be curious. So ask them questions rather than tell them what you think.
I love that. I mean, and that relates to your work, you know, the work that you described with schools, where you just ask that single question, you know, talk about one thing you enjoy or love. What was it exactly, the phrasing of that? Because that seems important, how you asked the question. What was the question you asked the
one that I asked
kids?
I say, tell me something about yourself that you're passionate about, that you love doing, or that you're good at. And it doesn't have to be anything to do with school.
That's a really, the phrasing of that and the framing of that question is really important, isn't it? Because it is about energy, passion. It's getting to the heart of, you know, what is something that, and almost allowing them to say anything.
Yeah.
You know, rather than be, which is your favorite subject, you know, which to many school kids is an oxymoron. You know, like they none of them.
Yeah,
because that's where they've got to with it. You know, it's not cool to answer that question anyway. So you know,
the end of school bell is my favorite part.
Yeah, exactly. Which you would get as an answer, I'm sure, from some cheeky chaps. But yeah, I think that's a brilliant question. Maybe we should add that in, I think, in the resources section of the show notes as well, just because the phrasing of that is so important. So that'd be amazing. Sure. Paul, thank you. Listen, we've come to an end of our time, but thank you so much for taking the time and for preparing, you know, what you have. And there's some brilliant resources for people to go away, read and watch. And I think more than anything, there's just reflection there to do around how can you do more as an educator? How can you do more as a parent? Because actually it's relatively simple. The steps that you can take, the things that you can do practically that will make a really big difference to children. So thank you for thinking all of that through and for bringing that to us today. Really appreciate it. There's always more on the Strengths Scope website, so if you want to shoot over there, we'll add all the resources to the show notes as mentioned, and Paul's contact details as well. So with that, we'll say goodbye until next time. Stay strong.
Thanks, Paul.